Did you know that Napoleon's tactics during the Italian campaign are still studied in military academies around the world today? Discover why these battles were so revolutionary. Today, we're diving into one of Napoleon's most famous military campaigns, his Italian campaign. Before we begin, remember to like, subscribe and share this video so you never miss out on any of our uploads. The Italian campaign of 1796-1797, waged by a young Napoleon Bonaparte, was a decisive campaign in the French Revolutionary Wars 1792 to 1802. It led to the defeat of Austria, the beginning of French control of northern Italy, and the end of the war, but most importantly, it launched Bonaparte himself to new heights of fame and power. The War of the First Coalition, the first of the Revolutionary Wars, had been going on since 1792, fought between the French Republic and a coalition of anti-French powers. Yet, most of the fighting had taken place in Flanders and Germany, leaving the Italian front as more of a sideshow. Upon taking command of the Army of Italy in March 1796, Bonaparte would make the Italian theatre the most important operation in the war, stunning all of Europe as he beat every Austrian army sent against him and redrew the map of northern Italy. His brilliant campaign led Austria to sue for peace and end the war in October 1797, and made Bonaparte one of the most influential men in France. On 27th March 1796, General Napoleon Bonaparte arrived in Nice to take command of the French army of Italy. It had been a whirlwind of a month for the young general, who had received the command on 2nd March, only 7 days before marrying Josephine de Beauharnais. Josephine was the former mistress of Paul Barras, a member of the French Directory and one of the most powerful men in France, leading to rumors that Bonaparte had only received his command as a favor from Barras to his old paramour. Yet, by this point, Bonaparte had already built a reputation in the French army, having distinguished himself at the Siege of Toulon in 1793 and by crushing the royalist revolt of 13th Vendémiaire in 1795. Upon arriving at Nice, General Bonaparte's first order of business was to hold a troop inspection. He was met with a ragged, demoralized force on the point of mutiny. The men were starving and malnourished, given only meager rations provided by corrupt contractors who charged extortionate prices. They lacked the most basic supplies. Muskets, bayonets, and uniforms were all rare commodities, and entire battalions went without shoes. The army had not been paid for months, and when pay did arrive, it was in the form of the nearly worthless banknotes called mandats territoriaux, which was all the practically destitute French Directory could provide. Disease, desertion, and battlefield casualties had whittled the army down from an initial strength of 106,000 men in 1792 to only 37,600 men and 60 guns in March 1796. Bonaparte had his work cut out for him. Bonaparte was also introduced to his officers, many of whom would become major players in the Napoleonic story. Bonaparte's chief of staff was Alexandre Berthier, an administrative genius whose ability to work 20 hours a day and keep up with Bonaparte's rapid-fire orders kept the army staff running like clockwork. The division commanders included Jean Serre, a gloomy general with 34 years of experience in the old Royal Army, Pierre Augereau, a former mercenary, dancing master and duelist, who once killed an officer over an insult, and André Massena, a talented general. Other soon-to-be famous officers under Bonaparte's command included Joachim Murat, Jean-Andoc Junot, Jean Glanes, Barthélemy Joubert, and Auguste Marmont. At first, these officers were unimpressed with their new commander-in-chief. At only 26, the short and wiry Bonaparte looked more like a mathematician than a general, and the pleasure he took in showing off the portrait of his new wife made him seem juvenile. The generals would soon realize they had underestimated him. Immediately, Bonaparte reorganized the commissariat and threatened the venal contractors. He recalled the cavalry from winter quarters and quietly secured a loan of 3 million francs from Genoese financiers. He reintroduced discipline by disbanding mutinous battalions and court-martialing 2 officers for singing anti-revolutionary songs. Within days, Bonaparte had won the respect of his subordinates. Bonaparte next tried to win over the rank-and-file soldiers, promising them the victories and riches that had hitherto only been afforded to their comrades in Germany and Flanders. It was a bold promise, especially for a general who was yet to lead an army into battle. On 10th April, 5 days before Bonaparte intended to launch his campaign, he received word that 53,000 Austrian and Piedmontese troops were already bearing down upon him. The time had come for Bonaparte to meet his destiny. The Kingdom of Piedmont-Sardinia had been at war with the French Republic since 1793, but its heart was not in the fight. The Piedmontese distrusted their Australian allies, whose commander, Johann Beaulieu, had likewise been warned against trusting the Piedmontese. Therefore, it was Bonaparte's intention to drive a wedge between the two armies and defeat each one in turn. On 12th April, moving with astonishing speed, he attacked Montenotte, a mountain village where the enemy line was dangerously overextended. Massena led his division around the enemy's right flank in the pouring rain and enveloped them. It was Bonaparte's first victory as commander-in-chief of an army. The Austro-Piedmontese lost 2,500 men to 800 French casualties. In the following days, Bonaparte beat the Allies twice more at Millesimo and Dago, where he succeeded in driving the retreating Piedmontese and Austrian armies apart. He launched an invasion of Piedmont, defeating the Piedmontese army a week later at the Battle of Mondovi, which left the road to Piedmontese capital of Turin wide open. Piedmont-Sardinia sued for peace and accepted the armistice of Cherasco on 28 April. In less than a month of campaigning, Bonaparte had knocked one enemy out of the war. Now it was time to face the Austrians. As part of the Treaty of Cherasco, Bonaparte included a secret clause which allowed him to use the bridge at Valenza over the river Po. This news was leaked to Austrian General Beaulieu, who guarded the pass. However, this was just a ploy by Bonaparte, who actually crossed the river at Piacenza, 110 kilometers to the east. The Austrians were taken by surprise and were forced to pull back to protect the road to Milan. The French pursued and, on 10th May, intercepted the Austrians as they crossed the Adda River at the town of Lodi. By the time the French arrived, most of the Austrian army was already across, and only a rearguard force remained in the town. The rearguard was driven back by grenadiers under General Lannes, but Bonaparte was now faced with the task of seizing the bridge across the Adda before the Austrians destroyed it. A company of carabineers under Colonel Dupas accepted the suicidal task of leading the assault, and at 5 p.m., the French made a frenzied charge onto the bridge into a hail of Australian grape shot. French soldiers waded into the shallows and fired up at Austrian gunners, while wave after wave of French assaults finally took the bridge. By itself, the Battle of Lodi held little significance. The Austrians were already retreating, and both sides suffered equal casualties. Yet, the battle showed the determined bravery of the French soldiers and soon took an important place in Napoleonic legend. Bonaparte's victory at Lodi earned him the love of his men, who gave him the affectionate nickname of the Little Corporal. Fearing that Bonaparte was becoming too popular, the Directory in Paris proposed that he split the command of the Army of the Italy with the more experienced General Kellerman of the Army of the Alps. Bonaparte not only refused to share command but threatened to resign if he was forced to. Unwilling to risk losing their most successful general, the Directory abandoned the scheme. Entering Milan on 15th May 1796, the Army of Italy entered Milan to great fanfare and acclaim from the populace, which was glad to see the back of the Austrian army. Bonaparte immediately set about reorganizing the Milanese government into a new sister republic or French satellite state that became the Transpadane Republic. Bonaparte helped draft the republic's constitution, appointed Italian Jacobins to the government, and ensure the foundation of pro-French political clubs. Despite this mask of liberation, Bonaparte still had an army to pay, and he levied a total of 20 million francs from Milan and the Dukes of Parma and Modena. Thus, the army of Italy was paid in hard cash for the first time since 1793. Bonaparte turned a blind eye as his generals looted the city and sent priceless works of art back to Paris. On 21st May, he departed for Mantua, where Beaulieu had holed up with his army. But no sooner had he left than he received reports of rebellions breaking out in Milan and Pavia. Bonaparte swiftly returned and brought severe retribution on the Italian rebels. He stormed the gates of Pavia and let his men sack the city without restraint for several hours, while General Lannes took vengeance on the rebellious town of Binasco, shooting all the men and burning the houses down. Such brutality was meant to warn the rest of occupied Italy of the cost of defying the French liberators besieging Mantua. Mantua was part of the Quadrilateral, a collection of 4 fortresses that guarded the Alpine passes and held the key to Austrian control of northern Italy. Therefore, when Bonaparte besieged Mantua on 2nd June with a reinforced and resupplied army, it was vital for the Austrians to prevent it from falling. Field Marshal Dagobert von Wurmser, a veteran of the 7 Years' War, was given command of 50,000 troops and ordered to relieve the siege of Mantua at all costs. To move more swiftly, Wurmser decided to divide his army. 18,000 men under his Lieutenant General Kasdanovich would advance down the west side of Lake Garda, while Wurmser himself led the remaining 32,000 down the east side. When Bonaparte caught wind of this advance, he knew he had to defeat each army before they had a chance to coalesce. At the end of July, Bonaparte ended the siege of Mantua, abandoning 179 cannons and mortars and dumping their ammunition into the lakes. On 3 to 4 August, he beat Kasdanovich at the Second Battle of Lonato, and he defeated Wurmser at the Battle of Castiglione the next day. After losing some 5,000 men across the battles, the Austrians were forced to retreat, allowing Bonaparte to return to Mantua to continue the siege. Wurmser regrouped and attacked again at the end of August. He met Bonaparte in a series of battles but was defeated at the Battle of Bassano on 8 September. Still hoping to relieve the siege, Wurmser retreated toward Mantua, but another defeat at the hands of General Massena forced him into the city. Now, with the addition of Wurmser's men, there were not enough supplies to feed the entire garrison. When Bonaparte promptly resumed the siege, the Austrians quickly had to resort to eating horseflesh. Before long, disease and malnutrition carried off 150 soldiers per day, as well as countless civilians. Despite the suffering, Wurmser refused to surrender. Abandoned in the depths of Italy in November, the Austrians made a third attempt to lift the siege. This time, they were commanded by the 61-year-old Hungarian general Joseph Alvinzi, who Bonaparte would later praise as his most capable adversary in the Italian campaign. On 2nd November, Alvinzi crossed the Piave and sent forces under Kasdanovich ahead of him to take Vicenza via Bassano. On 6th November, Bonaparte tried to stop Kasdanovich's advance at the Second Battle of Bassano, but the French general found himself outnumbered and was forced to withdraw. It was the first real defeat of Bonaparte's career. Falling back to Vicenza, Bonaparte received word that a French division under General Vaubois had suffered a crushing defeat near Chambra and Caliano. Needing to reassert discipline, Bonaparte removed Vaubois from command and harangued his men. These humiliated demi-brigades fought with extra vigor in the coming fights. On 12th November, Bonaparte held Verona against an onslaught of Austrian troops, and both sides rested the following day. This was undoubtedly the bleakest moment in the campaign, as evidenced by Bonaparte's despairing letter to the Directory. "Perhaps the hour of my own death is at hand. We are abandoned in the depths of Italy." But Bonaparte was not about to admit defeat. On 15th November, he attacked Alvinzi at the Battle of Arcole, with most of the fighting taking place around a bridge over the Adige River. After an initial attempt to seize the bridge by Augereau's men was repulsed, Bonaparte seized a flag and led the second charge himself. The charge became bogged down on the bridge, and Bonaparte's aide-de-camp was killed beside him. Bonaparte would probably have been killed himself had he not knocked off the bridge and into the marshy ground beneath. It took 2 more days and 3,000 casualties, but the French ultimately seized the bridge and won the battle. After Arcole, Bonaparte continued to lay siege to Mantua. Of the 18,500 soldiers garrisoned in the city, only 9,800 were fit for duty, and the city's rations were expected to run out by 17th January. If Austria wanted to lift the siege, it had to do it soon. A fourth and final attempt was made by Alfonsi, and the two armies clashed once again on 14th January 1797 at the Battle of Rivoli. It was a resounding French victory. While the French lost 3,000 men, the Austrians suffered 4,000 killed and wounded and lost an additional 8,000 captured. Rivoli dashed the last hopes of Mantua. They finally surrendered on 2nd February. 16,300 Austrian soldiers had died of starvation and disease since the siege began, along with thousands of civilians. The fall of Mantua opened Bonaparte's army to its ultimate objective, Vienna. On 10th March 1797, Bonaparte led 40,000 men through Tyrol to Klagenfurt and then to Leoben in Styria, where they could apparently see the spires of Vienna, 160 kilometers away. Bonaparte fought a few minor battles against Archduke Charles, brother of the Austrian Emperor, but the Austrians dared not to risk a major fight as they were still threatened by the French armies on the Rhine. The Austrians decided to sue for peace, and Bonaparte accepted their offer for an armistice at Leoben on 2nd April. The details of this armistice were finalized on 17th October 1797 with the Treaty of Campo Formio. The war of the First Coalition was over. Bonaparte overstepped himself by negotiating on behalf of the French Republic, not even bothering to consult the Directory. He got Austria to acknowledge French control of Belgium and the left bank of the Rhine, as well as the creation of a new sister republic in Italy, the Cisalpine Republic. In compensation for Austria's territorial losses, Bonaparte offered it lands belonging to the neutral Serene Republic of Venice, an ideal sacrificial lamb. Venice was thereby partitioned between Austria and the Cisalpine Republic, ending the Serene Republic's 1200-year existence. The Italian campaign of 1796-1797 saw the dawn of a new era. While it contributed significantly to France's victory in the French Revolutionary Wars, it was perhaps more important for its role in the creation of Napoleon Bonaparte. Bonaparte became a celebrity in Paris and found himself renowned throughout Europe. His generals, many of whom would go on to serve as Napoleon's marshals, earned fame and glory in Italy. Not even 28 years old, Bonaparte had changed the map of northern Italy, given life to republics, humbled one of Europe's foremost powers, and achieved heights of popularity at home. But despite all this, the story of Napoleon was only just beginning. And that wraps up our exploration of Napoleon's Italian campaign. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. Thanks for watching.